Coming up on That Was the Moment.
And she came back on the line and she said, yes, I have a Lauren and an Ollie arriving in Jordan this evening. And that was the moment that my mom knew that he had taken me.
I'm your host, Ashanka, and you're listening to That Was the Moment I Was Kidnapped by My Father. My guest today is Lauren Burns. Lauren is a full-time physical therapist, a mum of 2 boys, and is married to an amazing man. Lauren is the host of Redeemed podcast and is in the process of writing a book to point people to Jesus. Thank you so much for being here, Lauren.
Oh, thank you for having me. I am excited to be on your show today.
Why don't you tell us about what life was like before your moment?
Before my moment, that's a fantastic question because there's been a couple moments, but before my moment, I would say that I was in my middle school, high school years full of anger and bitterness and brokenness, looking around thinking, why does my childhood have to look so hard and so different? Why did I have to grow up without my biological father in my life? And that brought on a lot of empty feelings. I was longing for the love of a man and that attention of a man. I was angry that my childhood was sort of stolen from me and all of those unanswered questions. Middle school and high school is hard, right? It's hard anyways. It's awkward, especially for women, for girls. Mm-hmm. And I just was struggling with all those unanswered questions and emotions. The question is like, why did I have that broken childhood? And why wasn't my father a part of my life? When my parents met when they were in their younger years in the Dallas, Texas area, and my father's Jordanian from Jordan. Jordan is near Israel, and my mom is from Florida, but they both met in Texas. And at the time, they fell in love working at a restaurant, and they got married. At that point, my mom was a Christian. She'd been raised a Christian. My father was raised Muslim. My mom was going to church, but my dad didn't mind. He didn't go with her, but he was like, you do your thing, I'll do mine. But he wasn't really practicing his religion at that time. And then my mom became pregnant, and he was excited to be a dad. And he told my mom that his dad was sick and he needed to go to Jordan to take care of his dad. And she understood. But instead of being gone for a couple weeks, it turned into about 3 months that he was gone without a lot of conversation. She didn't really know what was going on. So here my mom was in her early 20s by herself, pregnant, scared, thinking that he had just abandoned her. And my mom had really good friends in Dallas, Rick and Beverly Lambert. It's a little side note. If anyone loves country music, their daughter is Miranda Lambert, the big country music singer. But before she was a famous country singer, she was my friend. So they were my mom's closest friends at that time. And my mom was sort of leaning on them. Was like, I don't know if Ollie's going to come back. He is gone. I'm not really hearing from him. And so she had me about 4 to 5 weeks early. I was a preemie, and probably because of all the stress.
Yeah.
And then my dad came back, and when he came back, she was, can you imagine, the emotions of being mad and scared and like, where have you been? And he comes back and he's like, well, I went to Jordan to make a home for us. I have a job, I have a home, and I want to raise Lauren in Jordan. And she freaked out. She was like, what are you talking about? We never talked about moving to Jordan. We never talked about raising Lauren there. I don't want to move. And so by the time I was 6 weeks old, my mom was already going through the process of a divorce because things were changing pretty quickly in her life. And so for her, again, if you've ever had children, it's like, what is happening? Here I have this newborn. I'm having to learn how to live on my own now. And I'm about to be a single mom. So my life started, all I knew was a divorced family. And I'd go see my dad on the weekends, the typical every other weekend. But my parents had a great relationship. I went back and forth anytime my dad wanted to see me, no problem. If my mom needed help and wanted me to stay longer with my dad, no big deal. They really had a good relationship. But everything changed in my life at the age of 7. My father had asked my mom if I could go trick or treating with him and his family. At this point, he had remarried. He had 2 other children, which I loved my stepmom. We had a great relationship. I had a great relationship with my siblings. It was fun because I'd go to their house and the house was full of kids, and I was the big sister. Because with my mom, it was just the 2 of us. It was like me and her, we'd get up in the mornings, clean the apartment, get our chores done. It's like we were best friends. So 2 different dynamics between the 2 households. I was excited to go trick-or-treating. I grabbed my little cheerleading outfit. I was going to be a cheerleader, and was all excited to show off. And when my dad went to pick me up, I had my little pink suitcase, got it in the car, and my siblings weren't with him. And my stepmom wasn't with him. And he looked at me. He's like, "Lauren, I have a big surprise for you." And I was like, "I know, we're going trick-or-treating." And he was like, "No, we're going to the airport." And I was like, "What? What do you mean the airport? Where's my sister? Where's my brother?" And he said, "I'm going to take you to Jordan to see your family. You've never gone. I want it to be a surprise." And, I'm thinking, what do you mean? My mom never told me. Does my mom know? Does she say it's okay? And he's like, "We didn't want you to know. It was going to be a surprise. That's why she didn't say anything. Don't worry. Everything's fine." So I keep asking questions, 7-year-old little girl asking all the questions. But he began to get a little bit more irritated the more I would ask. And so finally he's like, "Lauren, it's fine. Don't worry. You'll see. Everything will be fine." Well, everything was not going to be fine. My mom was a single mom, like I said, and all she did was work. She had to work nonstop. He wasn't really paying much child support, and it was really all on her. I had just started a new school, and the typical working mom, it's very hard to leave your work in the middle of the day to go have lunch with your child at school. That just doesn't really happen. But on this particular Monday, my mom decided to go to the school during my lunch to surprise me, to have lunch with me. And when she went, she watched as my class lined up in the courtyard to go to the lunchroom. And she's scanning the kids, and she doesn't see me. And the teacher catches her eye, and she walks over and she's like, "Where's Lauren?" And the teacher was like, "Kathy, she never came to school today." And she's like, "What do you mean she didn't come to school today?" So of course, again, the emotions, the frustration, the anger. And she's like, your ex-husband never brought her to school." Well, back in the 80s, there's no cell phone. So she goes to the closest payphone and she picks up the phone and she dials my dad's house. And it rings and rings and rings and rings and no one answers. So then she dials his restaurant. He owned a restaurant in the Dallas area, and they answered and they said, "Ollie never came to work today." Well, that's when those emotions started to change. Now she was becoming fearful. And it was like God just told her right then and there. Her third phone call was to the headquarters. Alia Airport's the main airport that flies into Jordan. She called the headquarters in New York and she asked, "Do you have a Lauren and an Ollie arriving in Jordan today?" And the lady said, "Ma'am, I can't give out that kind of information." And then she broke down and she began to cry and she said, "Ma'am, I think my ex-husband has taken my daughter. Will you please look?" So the woman put her on hold and said, one moment. And she came back on the line and she said, "Yes, I have a Lauren and an Ollie arriving in Jordan this evening." And that was the moment that my mom knew that he had taken me.
Wow.
So her next phone call was to Beverly and Rick Lambert, her closest friends. Rick happened to be a police officer in the Dallas area, and him and his wife had happened to have a private investigation company. So she paged Rick on his pager 911. And Rick and Beverly had been working at the Dallas County Courthouse that day, and they were together when the page came through. So Rick grabbed his pager and said, "Something's wrong. Kathy's calling me 911." So he got on the phone and called my mom, and standing at that payphone, she told him, Ollie's taken Lauren and they're in Jordan. So they immediately got in the car and they rushed to my mom's townhouse and they all met there. And that's when everything began to just unravel. My mom started calling my dad's family members, trying to get a hold of my stepmom, trying to get a hold of anyone she could to get answers, while Rick was trying to call all his contacts with the police department to see what do we do. Every phone call my mom made was, Kathy, I have no idea where Ollie is. He never said he was going to take Lauren. I don't know what you're talking about. He actually sent my stepmom and his other children out of Texas to go visit her family in a different state 2 weeks prior to him taking me. He told my stepmom, I just want you to go on vacation because she was pregnant with their third child and said, I want you to go and be with your family. You need to rest. Well, of course, she was like, okay. So she left. So no one knew what he was planning. So days of trying to call Jordan, and every time she would call, they would only speak Arabic, and she would beg. There's a movie made about my life called Desperate Rescue, the Kathy Mahone story. And when all of this happened, there's tons of newspaper articles and magazines about my story. My mom collected all of that information, all of the photos. She put them all in a box, thinking one day I might want to research all of this and know the details of my story. Well, in the bottom of that box was a Ziploc bag full of cassette tapes. I had to get on Amazon and order a cassette tape player because I don't
Yeah.
have one. But Rick Lambert had told my mom when all of this happened, one of the first things he said is, Kathy, go to Radio Shack, if anybody remembers what Radio Shack was, and get a recording device and put it on your phone. So anytime you call Jordan, if you happen to talk to Ollie, if you talk to the police, we will have recordings of everything because your emotional state, you're not going to be able to remember, and we need to have clues of where Lauren might be. So I began to listen to those cassette tapes. And they're voice recordings of my mom calling Jordan, begging, please let me talk to Lauren. I'm her mother. Please let me talk to Ollie. Where is he? This is not right. You have to bring her back. And all they would say is, oh, no English, no English. Phone call after phone call. And then the police said, ma'am, there's nothing we can do. Children are taken all of the time, and there's nothing we can do to help you. So days of calling, she got a hold of my stepmom. My stepmom was beside herself. She had no clue what my dad had done. She was calling him saying, what are you doing? Come back to the States. Bring Lauren back. And he kept saying, well, just come to Jordan and we'll have a family here. And she told him, I will never raise Lauren as my own daughter because she has a mom. Bring her back. But he wasn't listening to anyone. So days of phone calls and weeks of phone calls and nothing happening. You can imagine she was beyond desperate. She was beside herself. And Beverly told her and said, Kathy, you have got to get away from all of the noise, the emotions, and the chaos day after day because everyone's giving her advice and she doesn't know what to do. And she said, you've got to get alone and you've got to pray. You need to go away and pray and fast. And my mom broke down crying and said, you're right. I need to get away. I need to be with Jesus. I need to get out away from the chaos. And that's what she did. She got in the car, packed a bag, grabbed her Bible, and she drove to Fort Worth, didn't know where she was going, checked herself into a motel room, and she was there for 3 days fasting and praying and begging God to help her. And during that time, I actually have the scripture verse that God gave my mom. Daniel 10:12. Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. That's what my mom needed to hear. God was like, Kathy, I see you. I see your fear. I see your anger. I see your emotions. I see you. But because you are humbling yourself and you're coming before me, I'm going to honor your prayers. And God just sort of showed her some areas of her life that she needed to let go of. Sometimes God doesn't want us to just pray, but he wants us to take action and to have a little bit of faith. And so God told her, I need you to let go of your cigarettes, because my mom was a big smoker. And can you imagine? Like, I think she was smoking 2 cigarettes at a time at that point. Cigarettes are not the worst thing in the world. But for her, it's like, instead of putting your idol into your cigarettes, I want you to trust me. And the other thing was to let go of any unresentment and unforgiveness in your life. Let those things go. And so in that motel room, my mom said, if you let me see Lauren again, I won't ever smoke again. And I put down all the anger and the bitterness I have. And she walked out of that motel room with a peace that she just hadn't had during all of that time. And then things began to change. Rick Lambert he had organized a meeting for my mom to go to the Dallas County Courthouse to meet with the grand jury. And he told her, he was like, Kathy, this meeting is probably not going to come of anything, so don't get your hopes up. It's really just a process that we have to go through. So if Ollie comes back to the United States for whatever reason, to see his wife and his kids, then there will be a warrant out for his arrest. So she went to the grand jury that day with Rick, and she stood in that courtroom with the panel, and she began to tell them about my father taking me and the things she had done to try to get me back, and how everywhere she turns, everyone tells her, we can't help you. And as she's telling her story, everyone in the panel, they're nodding their head. And at the end, they said, I'm so sorry, ma'am, but we hear these stories all the time. Kids are taken all the time out of the country, but we can't help you because the United States does not have any kind of treaty with Jordan. And she just sort of let her guard down, and she was like, can I be real honest with you? And she began to let the tears fall. And she said, it's not fair. We give so much foreign aid every year to different countries, and you're telling me that you can't even help me get my daughter back? It's just not fair. And everyone on that panel started nodding and agreeing with her. And one man stood up and opened his wallet and said, my name is Al Zaponta. If you're not happy with the State Department, here's my card. Give me a call. And so she took the card and she left, and, she still felt defeated. But she called Al the next day, and Al began to tell my mom, 1 week prior to her meeting him in that jury room in that courthouse in Dallas, he was in Washington, D.C. Al Zaponta is way high up in the military and in the political world. He's still very active to this day. And so he was in Washington meeting with a man named Everett Alvarez. And Everett Alvarez, most people in the military, they learn about Everett Alvarez when they're going through training. He was a POW, and he's very high up in the military. He was having lunch with Everett, and Everett was telling Al about an organization by the name of CTU, a group of men that had just started a company to go to foreign country like the Middle East to rescue people, not just children, but to rescue people that have been captured. A week before my mom standing in that courthouse. It's like God was just planning a way the whole time. And then he happened to be in the courthouse talking to my mom that day.
Wow, that's definitely like divine intervention, isn't it?
I'm 100%.
That must have given your mum so much hope, like a new sense of hope that maybe she didn't have before.
Yes. Day after day, she was talking with people. When she went to the State Department, they mailed her a packet. Oh, your daughter's been taken. Here's a packet. Like, read through all of these papers. And it was support groups. And so she would reach out to some of the people in the support groups. Well, the people she was talking to, they had not seen their kids in 4 and 5 years. One was a grandmother. The grandmother would fly, I believe it was to Israel, twice a year to see their grandson. That's the only time they could see their grandson. So every day my mom's hearing these kind of stories.
And that's probably taking away hope as opposed to like giving you hope. You're thinking, okay, so this is going to be my reality and I just have to come to terms with and accept it.
100%. Yes. Yes. She was defeated. After meeting Al, my mom was like, yes, I want to meet these men. And Al was like, Kathy, I don't know if they're willing to do this mission. I don't know what it's going to cost. It's going to cost a lot of money. My mom was like, I don't care. This is the first yes that she's heard, right? A first possibility. I don't care what it's going to cost. Make it happen. So Everett Alvarez actually went to the CTU office in person and met with one of the men. His name is Don, and Don knew exactly who Everett was and said, "Yes, we'll take on this mission." And he's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, slow down. This is a non-sanctioned. This is not military. You are doing this on your own. The United States cannot help you if you say yes to this mission." And he was like, "I understand. We will at least go to Texas. We'll talk to the mom. We'll see what she has to say." So they flew to Texas. My mom had already gathered every photo she had of my dad, myself. She had made little spiral notebooks full of information. My dad had like 12 siblings. She wrote out descriptions of each person in his family, what they did for a living, what their characteristics were like, everything she could remember. She drew maps of the city. She drew pictures of his family home because she had gone there before they got married, like a pre-honeymoon. So she was doing everything from memory and trying to gather all the information. So when she showed up to that meeting, she had as much as she could to show these men. And they were pretty impressed with her for how organized she was and how calm she was with all that had been going on. So after talking with her and seeing how determined she was, they agreed to take on the mission. But they told her, they said, again, it's going to take a lot of money just to pull this off. And we may not be successful. And you're risking your life to go and to do this. And she said, I don't care. If you're willing, this is what I want to do. I want to try to get her back.
Wow.
In the United States, two people have to show up for a child to get a passport. One of the reasons that happens is because of my story and other children like me that have been abducted. So both parents have to be there in person, but in the 80s, it was only one parent. So my dad had my passport, obviously, because I was in Jordan. And so my mom had to try to get a passport without me being present. They had to get visas. They had to get entry stamps. So my mom had to go to Washington, D.C. She spent about a week and a half there trying to meet with all kinds of people, going to the Jordanian embassy, doing everything she could to get the paperwork she was going to need for herself and for me. That took a lot of work. Then Dave is one of the men that was on the rescue team. He went into Jordan before anybody else. His job was intelligence, was to, one, try to find me. He had to try to get eyes on me to make sure I was actually in Jordan, because there was a little bit of talk that I may have been in Lebanon, because I had a grandmother in Lebanon, and to try to locate my dad's home. But he also had to figure out an escape route for us. So he spent 2 weeks driving between Syria and Jordan and Israel, trying to see what would be the safest way out, because they can't just put me on a plane and leave. So he drove to Aqaba. Aqaba is a small town where there's a water. He felt like it was enough. The distance was short enough to be able to swim. So he thought about just putting me on his back and swimming me across. But when he got there, he realized there's no way. There's such a heavy military presence there that yes, he could physically swim me, but it would be too dangerous because of all the military there. So then he took another route that would have been a 7-hour drive down a narrow dirt road. And he was like, there's no way we're going to make it out. So the best route that he can determine was between the border from Israel to Jordan. It's called the Allenby Bridge. And that was about an hour drive from my father's, the town where my father was from in Jerash, to Israel. But the problem with that is you have to change cars, leave your car on the Jordanian side, and you get on a bus and you drive over into Israel on a bus that takes you over. So you have to have a bridge pass. So that was more paperwork they had to figure out. And that Allenby Bridge was very highly secured with, the tall military towers with machine guns and soldiers everywhere and booby trapped. So he had to navigate all of that. In those 2 weeks, he couldn't find me. He never set eyes on me. So Don and JD, two of the other men, they came into Jordan, and they were all in disguises, and they were trying their best not to spend too much time out on the streets because, again, it's a small town. They didn't want to be recognized, like sticking out like some Americans. So they spent days in the ruins, acting like tourists, looking around the playgrounds and the markets and the streets, trying to find me. And after days of not being successful, JD was standing out on the street corner watching school buses go by. And a small school bus pulled up right in front of him where he was standing. And I was sitting on that bus. And I turned and I locked eyes with him. And he knew it was me because I have dark hair and olive skin, but I have really light eyes. And when he looked at me and he saw my eyes, he knew it was me. So he ran over to Dawn, which was a couple feet away from him, and he grabbed him by the shoulders and he shook them. And Dawn was like, "What's going on?" And he was like, "I saw her. I saw her on the bus." He was like, "Are you sure?" She's like, "Yes, I saw her eyes. I know it's her." And Dawn was like, "Where?" And he points at my bus as the bus is passing him by. So they get in the car and they try to follow my bus, but the roads were full of people and like donkey carts, and so they got blocked and they weren't able to continue to follow the bus. But at least they knew I was in Jordan and I was going to school. So now they had a little bit more information. So they decided to call my mom. At this point, my mom was waiting in Cyprus with another one of the men. His name is Jim Hatfield, and Jim was in charge of sort of staying with my mom, moving her in and out between the different countries, and handling all of the cash that they might need, because they paid with everything with cash because there's no trail with that. Mm-hmm. And they called my mom and they said, "Kathy, you're going to have to come to Jordan. We have spotted Lauren, but we can't find Ollie. We can't find the family home. The pictures you sent us are old and dated. These dirt roads are now paved. These small buildings are now big. And so we need you to come." So my mom got all clothed, covered her hair, put on sort of a disguise, and she flew into Amman, Jordan. And so the men met her in Jordan, and as they're driving her into Jerash, my mom's heart just begins to pound because they were right. Nothing looked the same. And all my mom could think is, "God, you did not bring me and these men this far to not even be able to find her and to find Ollie's house." My mom got down in the floorboard and the front seat of that car, and she closed her eyes and she began to pray out loud, crying hysterically, "God, you've got to help us find her. Please help us find her. You have to show me the way." And without ever opening her eyes, it's like, she told me it's like God began to remind her of her walking those streets 9 years before. And it's like God just started to show her which direction to go. And she began to say, "Turn left, go straight, turn right." And the men just did what she said because they had nothing else they could do. So like, okay, so they just did exactly what she said. And she opened her eyes, looked out the window, and she saw my dad's car sitting on the street corner with Texas license plates on it because he had shipped his car to Jordan. And in that moment, she sort of froze, and then finally she said, "I saw his car. I saw his car." So they said, "Kathy, hide your face, get down." And about that time, JD, I think it was JD or Dawn, looked out the car window and saw my dad come out of the building just long enough to recognize him, and then he went back in. So that was the moment that they found the location of my dad's home. But again, nothing happened until my mom began to pray. It's like God just kept saying, "Keep your eyes on me, and I'm going to direct every single step of the way." So now that they knew I was going to school, they found the house. Then they started, doing surveillance. They would watch the home every day, trying to figure out, how are we going to get Lauren out of Jordan? Because the family home was in the middle of the city. So they thought that's too dangerous to try to take her out of the house. So they began to watch the school bus. There was one little stop on the outskirts of town at a little farmhouse. And they decided that that would be the safest place to get me off of that bus outside of the city limits. The code word for the rescue was the sun is shining. For my mom, the sun is Jesus. So it's like just another thing, it's like the code word and just all of these things lining up. So the day of the mission, one of the men, their job was to scout out the house to make sure I actually got on the bus, because you don't want to hijack a school bus if I'm not even on it, right? Like, what if I was sick that day? So once he saw that I actually got on the bus, he said, yes, she's on the bus. My mom, JD, and Dawn were all in a car together, and they pulled up behind the school bus, blocking the bus in. Dawn got out and went over to the driver's side door to distract the driver. JD went out to the accordion style doors, trying to break the door in. And my mom went over to my side of the bus. She spotted me sitting on the bus, and she was in total disguise, and she knocked on the window. And there's a lot of things I have forgotten. I was 7 years old when all of this happened, but I'll never forget that day. When I talk about that day, it's really like I'm talking about someone else's life or a movie. But I remember looking at my mom, and all I could think was, it looks just like my mom. I mean, she's standing there and motioning to me, and I froze. I'm like, it looks like my mom, but how can it be? She's in Texas. She's in Dallas. That can't be my mom. And I think at that point, I just figured I was never going to see her again. And so I froze. I did not move. So my mom went around with JD, and she pushed her way onto the bus, past all of the kids, past all of the seats, and she grabbed me, and she grabbed my backpack. I'm not quite sure why. This is what we do as moms, I guess. And she's trying to get me off the bus. And as she's getting me off the bus and she steps down, there's a lady chaperone on the bus. She jumps on my mom's back. My mom had to let go of my hand long enough to turn around and punch the lady in the face. So there's blood coming down her face. I'm in total shock because now I'm seeing my mom punch somebody. JD comes over and he gets me and my mom into the car. And then Dawn, they take the keys out of the ignition and they throw them in the bushes, hoping that the bus driver will go looking for the keys and not go to the police as a decoy. And we get in the car and then we drive off. The other man, Dave, was in another car. So we switched cars, hoping that no one would recognize the car we were actually in. So Dave took the car that they used to hijack the bus, and he drove back towards the city to be a decoy. As Dave was driving back towards the city, the Jordanian police pull him over on the side of the road. The only thing Dave had in that car was like a Snickers bar and a soda. He had nothing to identify him or us. They pull him out of the car. They're ripping the whole car apart. They're looking through the trunk. They're asking him questions, and he just speaks English the whole time, acting like a tourist. They bring the bus driver over to where he is on the side of the road, and the bus driver's like, yes, that's the car, but I don't know who that man is, because he didn't recognize him. And so this goes on for like 30 or 45 minutes of them interrogating him on the side of the road, while we are on our way towards the Israeli border. About the time 30, 45 minutes goes by that they're interrogating Dave, all of a sudden on the police radio, Dave can hear Aliyah, Aliyah Airport, Aliyah Airport. In a matter of moments, all of the police leave Dave on the side of the road. They jump in their cars and they all go to the airport. My mom had booked flights for us that day to fly out of the Aliyah airport, hoping it would be a decoy. They shut down that whole airport looking for me. So Dave was able to escape. We're driving towards Israel. And while we're driving, the fog is so thick and so heavy, you could barely see the front of the car. But in the distance, there was this really bright light. And my mom was like, what is that place with the sun? It's, that bright place in the distance. And Dawn said, well, Kathy, that's Israel. That's where we're going. And my mom just began to cry again. She's like, the sun. the sun is shining over Israel. So she just prayed over me, and I didn't say a word. I was burning up with a fever. And the men told her, Kathy, this is normal. Lauren is in shock. This is very traumatic. She'll be fine. And she just sat in the back seat and continued to pray. We changed out of our clothes. She took me out of my school uniform. And we got to the border, and we had to get out of the car. We had to give all of our paperwork to the Jordanian soldiers, which was terrifying because we knew all of that stuff was bought, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my mom's trying to keep it together, and we're waiting and waiting and waiting. And they finally let us get on the bus, and we sit on the bus, and we're waiting and waiting and waiting. And all around us are artillery, soldiers, machine guns, barbed wire fences, you name it. And finally, the bus driver gets on the bus, and he finally cranks up the bus, and we begin to drive over that bridge. Well, in the midpoint of the bridge, the Jordanian soldier, the Jordanian bus driver, they get off, and an Israeli soldier and Israeli bus driver, like, they trade, because the Israeli soldier and bus driver will drive you on into Israel. About that time that was happening and our bus was going over into Israel, there was cars coming up on the Jordanian side, one after the other. They had just realized that I wasn't at the airport, but I was at that checkpoint going into Israel. But by the time they found out, we were already in Israel, and there's nothing they could do. So we get off of that bus, and we step down on that soil, and my mom just lost it. She began to cry, and there were some women standing in the bus terminal on the other side, and they went over to JD, and they're like, is that woman okay? Is the daughter okay? What is going on? And JD, this big military guy with tears in his eyes, begins to tell them what had just happened. He's like, that daughter was kidnapped and taken to Jordan, and she's been gone for 3 months, and we just brought her home to safety. And so the women began to sing and pray. It was like, thank you, Jesus. We've come to the Holy Land, and we've seen a miracle. And so that was our celebration, really coming back home to freedom.
Wow.
Mm.
Well, I know that you said that there is now a movie about that, but listening to you recall it, I could see the movie as you were saying it. I could just see it. And how absolutely terrifying for everyone involved. And I just keep thinking about your mum and all the different emotions, the fear, the anxiety. That must have just been the worst time of her life.
Mm.
How long had you been in Jordan for?
3 months. 3 months is nothing. I mean,
Yeah.
these children are gone for years. And in the 3-month time frame, I was going to school. People ask me, Lauren, did you realize what was going on? When my father put me in school, I knew something was wrong. I knew it wasn't a vacation. When I wasn't allowed to talk to my mom on the phone, when I got a chance to talk to her a few times, and it was very guarded, he said, don't, if she asks questions, don't tell her anything. I'm listening right here. It was very guarded. It was a whole culture shock for me. It was the first time for me to go to Jordan. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know the difference between the mosque and church. My dad was a different man in Jordan. In Jordan, he had to, I guess, to play different roles. Like the women took care of me. They did the cooking. They did the cleaning. My dad had nothing to do with me, which was so opposite. And in Dallas, he'd tuck me in at night. He'd give me a bath, wash my hair, cook for me. Not there. So as a child, I knew that there was big differences. So yes, I went through, big culture shock and trauma in a short amount of time. But it was years of, we lived in hiding. We changed our last names so that my dad wouldn't find me again. We moved so many times, countless amount of times. My mom spent $80,000 to get me back, and she had to reestablish herself. She had to start from scratch. We moved in with my grandmother so she could get back on her feet and start over again. So the years of anger and bitterness towards my father, my my biological father. He stole my childhood from me, and I had to learn how to forgive him, because I learned that bitterness and unforgiveness just makes my heart hard. It doesn't hurt him, it hurts me.
Mm.
And God had to walk me through forgiving, because the Bible says forgive 70 times 7. It's like, how many times do I need to forgive? Over and over and over again. And forgiving doesn't mean to forget. How can I forget what happened to me?
Mm.
If I forget, then I can't be on your show sharing what God did in my life. And forgiving doesn't mean to say it's okay what he did. Forgiving is saying, God, he's yours. It's not my job to punish or anything like that. I forgive him. I'm letting go of this anger so I can heal and I can move on. But that took a long time for me to get to that point. So my middle school and high school years, that was my journey, getting into church, getting into life group, getting into a place where people could support me and walk me through all those years of hurt.
As you were saying at the beginning, those teenage years for everyone, but especially women, are just so fraught with emotion, the ups, the downs, and then to deal with this trauma. Did you ever do any counseling or anything like that to help you come to terms with it?
I did a little bit when I was young. So again, Beverly Lambert, she's like a second mom to me. You can have all kinds of moms, right? Thank goodness. And I hope my boys have other parents that come along and help them when I can't. But in those middle school years, my mom had remarried when I was 12, and my stepfather was an amazing man. He just loved me. He was like the best stepdad you could ask for. He wasn't the type to be controlling. He just loved me. But it was hard because, like I said earlier, it was just my mom and I for so many years. She was my best friend. And even though I loved my stepdad, I had to get used to sharing my mom. But Beverly saw that I was going down a wrong road, right? She could see it in me. I was depressed. I was lonely. I was angry. So I actually lived with Beverly and Rick for about a year in Lindale. One of Miranda Lambert's songs, it's called The House That Built Me. I actually lived in that house. And I'll cry talking about it, but if you hear her song, I cannot listen to her sing that song without crying, because that was my place of healing. That was my counseling. Living there, Beverly got me involved in church. She got me involved in everything. It was a safe place. I was in a life group where we would just really pour our hearts out, and it was a place where I could talk through all my father wounds and anger issues, and I had people come alongside and pray over me. It was my place of healing and my place of counseling.
That's so special that you were able to have a second family
Yeah,
to to hold you and help you heal. Did you ever see your dad after that?
I did. And that's another really cool part of my story. I think it shows how brave my mom is. When I got older, I had so many questions. We would talk on the phone and it was so hard. And my mom would force me to, because she never wanted me to regret not knowing my dad. She never
Can
badmouthed my dad.
sorry, can we just stop and say, wow, your mum is incredible? Like,
Yes,
for her to go through all of that and still want you to have a relationship with him,
yes,
wow, that is forgiveness to another
yes,
level.
yes. So
Okay,
she
sorry.
No, I'm glad you said that. She is my example of forgiveness, right? Like, we as parents were supposed to be the example, but we mess up a lot. Yes, she was living example for me. And she would encourage me, Lauren, no, your dad's calling, or he would write me letters. But again, we were living in hiding. So he
Mhm.
would write letters to my grandmother's house, and my grandmother would send them to me. And then when we made phone calls, I think there was ways to block so he didn't know where we were calling from. So we did all these things. And it was just the weirdest thing to hear. His voice was so painful and bring up so many emotions for me. But we would talk and it was strained. He would call me his baby and I'm like, you don't even know me. It was just awkward. But when I was about 12 or 13, I really wanted to see him. He thought we were living in Florida. We put Florida's license plates on our car. We were already in Texas again by that time. We met at the Galleria Mall, a big mall, and I got to see my siblings. Seeing my siblings was easy. I couldn't wait to see them because they're innocent in all of this. But when I saw my dad, And my stepdad was with me, thank God, because he's just the most happy, easygoing man. But it was hard and scary and emotional, but it was just a part of that healing process. Like, I saw him, and my mom's right there with me, and like, it's crazy to see him again. So I saw him for dinner at the mall, and then I saw him again the next day, and at 2 days I was exhausted. And so then we talked again. I saw him in my high school years. He actually came to my high school graduation in Lindale, Texas, which is a small little town. Everybody in the town knew my story, my movie. So when they walked in, they all knew who he was. That was a little awkward. Then my mom invited him to our home. So my siblings and my dad, they all came to our home, and we had dinner together at my mom's table for my high school graduation. So talk about forgiveness. Yeah, we did that.
Wow. Did he face any like charges for abducting you? Or I guess at that point it was not abduction, was it? Legally?
It was, yeah,
Okay.
yes. In my younger years, he did go to jail. When we lived in Florida, there was two false alarms. So anytime he entered the country, we were alerted. And twice, um, I was pulled out of my classroom. The whole school knew what was going on because, I mean, the media was wanting our story. We had people like trying to find family members to get information about us and pictures of us. Everybody wanted our story at that time. But on two occasions, they came to my classroom, the principal, and pulled me out of my class, and they kept me in the principal's office till my mom could get there because they were alerted that my dad had entered the country, and they just wanted to keep me safe. But the third time, he actually did come back, and he did some jail time, but then he ended up living back in the United States for many, many, many years after that. And then after my many times in my high school years trying to reconnect, and then into my college years, I spent some time with him. I went and spent time with his whole family. But I just got to the point where it was hard for me, and I decided I just really didn't want a relationship with him. I had forgiven him, but it was just too painful, too awkward. He couldn't really understand me. So I just had to let that part go.
Going through everything that you went through, did it affect the way you trusted people?
No. People have asked me that over the years. I think God has totally protected me because I shouldn't trust men. I should have had a difficulty with that. My only struggle in my younger years is like I longed for that. Like I wanted to be in a relationship. I longed for that love and attention from a man,
Mm.
but trusting, no. And I really think that that's just answered prayers because with everything that I'd gone through, I should have trust issues. But no. But just sort of like you said earlier about like my mom being able to forgive my dad. I mean, a lot of that is God's provision of protecting and that strength and that faith and not living in fear. And like my mom in that prayer closet, she calls it her prayer closet when she was in that motel. Before going into that motel, she was full of fear and anxiety and her brain spinning out of control, which is what we all do. But coming out of it, there was a peace over her. There was a calm over her. There was a boldness that God just filled her up. It was really God's provision of that. And to answer your question, I think the same thing for me. Anger, bitterness, I dealt with for sure. All of the hurt and jealousy, I share all the time, especially when I talk to younger girls in middle school and high school. I would look around at my friends that had these perfect families, and we live in a world of social media now that we think things are perfect when we're looking on, but you never know the full story. But still, if you're comparing to your family, your life, your childhood, it hurts down deep. Those are the wounds and the things I had to deal with.
And what was it like living with um, this? I'm going to use the word celebrity, but I don't know if that's the right word. But the fact that there is a movie about your story and your mum's story, how was that having everyone at school know that, oh, she's been taken out because her dad might come and like that's a lot of attention. How did you cope with that? How did you manage living with all of that?
It was more the fear of my dad coming to get me at that time and not the celebrity. Because when that happened, it was before the movie was out and not everyone knew because we were still living in hiding. So
Okay.
when that occurred, we were living in Florida with my grandmother. We had moved from Texas, reestablished. We were surrounded by family, which is what we needed. It was the first time I'd ever really lived with my mom's family because, again, she moved from Texas and didn't have anybody, but Rick and Beverly were my family. So it was more fear. We were living in fear at that time. We had just changed my last name, just a made up name, and living in this hiding. And my mom and I were just healing together. So the movie didn't come out until I was 12, actually closer to 13. My mom had remarried. We had come back to Texas. And at that point, honestly, I thought I was so cool. I was going to a little private school at the time. And I remember we all watched the movie together at school. So I just thought I was really cool. I got to meet Mario Lopez, AC
Amazing.
Slater from Saved by the Bell, which was really cool when you're like
That is so
13.
cool.
And I don't know if anyone watched Blossom back in the day.
Yep.
I can't remember.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know her real name, but I got to meet all those people.
Yeah.
So that was just fun and exciting.
And I guess enough time had passed that it wasn't fresh trauma. It now established a new life and you were older.
Yes, and my mom and I would stay up and we would lay in bed together and we would read through the scripts for the movie. Like she would read her part and I would read mine. So we had a long time to sort of work through all of this and we're like, "Wait, I didn't say that. You didn't say that," which was also that was really cool too. So it was a process. It's not like the movie just came overnight. We also had lots of magazine articles and my mom was on several different talk shows like Inside Edition, and the 700 Club. So I was sort of used to some of those things leading up to the movie.
And did she find all of the talking about it healing?
Yes. Yes, and she was also helping other people. So other people were reaching out to her and she would give them guidance and she would tell them, "Don't go to the police, go here." And she would, just like other people were trying to help her during her time, she was trying to guide other parents going through the same thing. And she was speaking at churches and sharing her story at our church and different places that would ask her to speak. And so just like what I'm doing with you today, when you talk about it and you talk through it and people can be encouraged through your testimony, it helps you heal too.
Definitely. Not everyone is going to have this experience, but I guess for me, the biggest takeaway for me after listening to this is just about the power of forgiveness. And I have to say, so I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in a higher power. So I believe in the universe. God's a weird word for me,
Mhm.
but I do believe that there is something greater than us all. And everyone calls it something different. Listening to your mum's story of faith and belief in all of that is just really, really special. And I think whether you're talking to Jesus, God, the universe, I don't think the name doesn't matter in my opinion.
Mm.
But I think just having that faith and giving over the worries, giving over the fear, giving over all that anxiety and just trusting and believing, I think that is such a special, special message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if my mom took everyone's answer of, "You're never going to see your daughter again. I'm sorry, this happens all the time. No, we can't help you. We don't have a treaty with Jordan." And if she just thought, "Well, I'm a single mom, it's out of my control, oh
Mm.
well," I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. So, yes, that faith and trusting and putting one step in front of the other for our belief that God's provision, like, I'm so thankful that she didn't just say, "Oh, well."
Yes, definitely. But also, it feels like something got ignited inside of her. Like, I'm sure other parents that have had their child kidnapped, they don't want to ever give up.
No.
But it feels like she had just this something lit up inside of her and
Mm.
that just pure determination. I know not everyone has happy endings. like
Right.
yours.
Right.
Um, but I think her story, your story, does give hope that just because it didn't work for someone else
Right.
doesn't mean that it won't work for you.
Right. Yes. I have to be very careful too, because that's so true. If you're praying for something big like that, some people will be like, well, like I believe in God and I'm praying and I'm doing all the things, but my
Mm,
prayers weren't answered, or I didn't think good enough thoughts or whatever. That's not true either. Not every story is going to end up like mine,
mm,
and that's okay. But what are we going to learn through it? To continue to push forward for my beliefs, like what is God calling you to do even when the stuff doesn't go the way you wanted, even though those prayers aren't answered the way you want them, or the outcome isn't what you were looking for, you still have to move one foot in front of the other. And how are you going to lift your head up out of it?
And I think something you said about your mum when she was in that hotel room, it's not enough to just pray.
Yeah.
You have to take action,
Mm-hmm.
because prayer without action is nothing. You might
Yeah.
as well just not do anything.
Yeah.
So I think that is another really, really important step. And I think a lesson for everyone in every aspect of their life, regardless of what they're praying for,
Mm-hmm.
big or small. Because she could have just said, oh, that person said they never got their child back. So I'm just going to have to learn to live with it. Had things turned out differently, then perhaps she would have had to go through a process of acceptance.
Right.
But that was not her story.
Yeah, thankfully it wasn't, but it easily could have been.
Mm.
Yeah, and for the person that listens, that does know what it's like to have a child taken, my heart hurts for you, because it's not like you've done anything wrong to deserve any of those things and had a different outcome, and you still don't know the total end of your story, right?
Yeah, yes, that's very true. So, what's life like for you now?
Now I'm a physical therapist. As you introduced me, I work full time, and I have two boys. I'm married. My stepfather passed away in 2018, and he's the man that raised me. He was there when I graduated high school and college and walked me down the aisle. I think it's very normal that little girls think about who's going to walk you down the aisle if you don't have a father. And that was one of my fears growing up. And he was the one to walk me down the aisle. And I did get the opportunity to tell my dad. To me, it was another weird God thing. A couple months after my stepdad passed away, I walked into my mom's kitchen. She was helping me that day. She picked up my boys from school, so I went to pick them up. And my mom just really nonchalantly said, "Your dad called today." I was like, "My dad?" I'm thinking, my dad passed away? Like, what? It's like, "Your dad." I said, "Wait, Ollie called?" Because I hadn't heard from him in a long time. He had tracked my mom down on the internet because she was a realtor, and he was getting older and just wanted to hear from me. And she handed me the phone number and said, "If you want to call him, here's the number." And so I put the number in my pocket, and I've learned before I do anything or say anything, I just spend time praying. So I prayed over it for a couple days, and I just felt like God was telling me to call. I did. I dialed the number, and he answered, and I heard that heavy accent, and I told him who it was, and he immediately, called me. "Oh, hi, my baby." I got the opportunity to tell him, "I forgave you a long time ago. I'm not angry with you. I forgive you for the things that you did, but the man that raised me, the man that was my father for so many years, he recently passed away, but I want you to know I had a good father that loved me very much." And so to me, it was like God just giving me the opportunity to close that chapter with my dad and to forgive him and to sort of let him go, which was healing, just another healing part of my story.
Yeah, oh, that's really nice, and really great that you had that opportunity to, yeah, close that chapter. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us today?
No, I thank you for the opportunity to come on and to share. And if anyone's interested in hearing like the detailed stories, I've actually gotten a chance to interview all of the men that rescued me since I started my podcast. It's pretty cool. You know, you start a podcast or you start writing a book and you don't know what's going to come of it. And all of a sudden, I'm reconnected with everyone that was a part of my story. You can listen to some of those tape recordings of my mom talking to my dad. You can hear the details of the men telling their version of the stories and what they did during my rescue mission. So you can listen on the Redeem podcast. I never thought that I'd be sitting here doing these things. It's pretty cool.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm going to add all your contact details to the show notes so people can find you and get in touch with you. Have you been back to Jordan since?
No, but I have said my whole life I would love to go back because I really think I would remember more if I got a chance to go
Yeah.
back. So one day,
Yeah.
I've said that for so long, I need to make it happen.
I visited there in 2018, I believe, and I actually travelled the length of the country and back on my own, and I had the most amazing time. It is just a stunning, stunning country, and the people were just so lovely and welcoming. It's so when you were talking about different places, so I was like, I know exactly where she means. If you could be remembered by one word, what word would that be?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think redeemed. I've gone through a lot of hard things in my life. Yes, my kidnapping, but you know, losing my stepdad, the way that I lost him, and I lost a sister when she was 16 years old. There's just been a lot, but all those little broken places of my life is like God just continues to redeem and restore and heal. And so that's probably why I chose that word for the podcast, is just like through all that hard stuff, just rising up above it. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. It's unbelievable, but and also very inspiring.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for the opportunity.
my absolute pleasure. And honestly, give your mum the biggest hug from me. I just think she's just such a superhero.
She is a superhero and she needs to hear it. So I'm going to play your words for her. I am serious. Over and over again.
It's bringing me to tears just thinking about how much she loves you and her strength. That's really amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. I hope today's conversation empowers you and inspires you to know that no matter your current situation, your life can change too. All it takes is a moment. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and share it with a friend. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/thatwasthemoment. Until next time, be present in each moment, because you never know when your moment will come, or when you have the gift of being a moment for someone else. Take care.